Welcome to the Greater Columbus Sports Commission's virtual sports report. I am Linda Logan, our executive director and your host today. So some brief housekeeping notes for today. We will have some time for questions at the end of the program, so please consider dropping those questions into the chat. But very excited to get started today. We already had some nice conversations before you joined us. With us today is Dan Gavitt, Senior Vice President of Basketball for the NCAA, and Gene Smith, Senior Vice President and Wolf Foundation Endowed Athletic Director of Ohio State University, one of our board members, and we're very pleased to have both of you join us today. I think, Gene, a lot of our audience know a lot about you and what you do. I think, Dan, it'd be great for you to start out by introducing yourself and what your role is with the NCAA.
Sure, thanks, Linda. Great to be with everybody. I've been at the NCAA now for about 8 years as the Senior Vice President of Basketball, which entails overseeing all of the NCAA basketball championships, both men's and women's divisions 1, 2, and 3, as well as the NIT championship that the NCAA owns and operates. And more recently, the last couple of years, I also am involved with the governance side of our organization in working with the membership on legislation related to basketball, playing rules, officiating, anything really that touches on basketball, somewhat short, I guess, of the enforcement and infractions area, which is managed elsewhere. But that's kind of my oversight is all things basketball. We have a vice president for women's basketball, Lynn Holtzman, who manages most of the women's championships and issues, but we work very closely together, and really fortunate to have this opportunity to work on the game I love and on the tournaments that are so special to all of us.
Well, I know that when you think about just a year ago and the things that we did not know when pre-COVID was just getting started, you all had to make some tough decisions, in 2020, but it sounds like first and foremost, safety and student athlete safety has been at the forefront of all your decision making. And could you talk a little bit about what has gone into those discussions right now, and with this tournament bubble experience that in San Antonio for the women, and of course in Indiana for the men, and what that's been like for all of you?
Well, yeah, there's no question, as all of our institutions and conferences have been providing that safe and healthy environment for competition. We've managed the NCAA championships in the same way. Of course, we haven't had any NCAA championships until just next week. We'll start with some Division II championships, and then March Madness, of course, in just a few weeks' time. But thanks to the leadership of Dr. Brian Hainline, our Chief Medical Officer, and a group of team physicians and experts in infectious disease and all the areas that we need the guidance, have been working with institutions and conferences to develop the medical protocols that we need to have these championships be done in a safe and responsible way. Of course, we've had the good fortune, timing-wise, of learning from so many that preceded the NCAA championships competition. Of course, the regular season for college football and the regular season now for winter sports, as well as basketball and hockey and the like. But also other organizations, the NBA, WNBA, NHL, NFL, learned so much from all of them and the adjustments they've had to make to have safe and healthy competition. And because of that, I think we feel very confident that we have medical protocols that are appropriate to have NCAA championships and to have them be successful. But there's certainly significant changes. I think fundamental to it all is the availability of testing. As Gene and I were talking about before we started here, without testing availability, you couldn't have competition safely. And we knew that early on. Because it's available and we have access to it, we can have confidence that before any team takes the court or the field, that they are safe and won't spread the virus through athletics competition. But it takes an awful lot of discipline as well and sacrifice by student athletes and coaches to have the regimentation that requires continuing to be healthy and safe, and the distancing and masking and the meals done in an appropriate way, so that we continue to have that success and that safety.
And both in Indianapolis, or Indiana, I guess I should say Indianapolis in particular, and San Antonio are veterans when it comes to hosting large tournaments. So I'm sure they've been very valuable partners in making a lot of these decisions happen.
They have very much so. I mean, we were kind of fortunate that both Final Fours for the men and women were scheduled to be in Indianapolis and San Antonio, where we've had Final Fours and regular rounds of the tournament for some time. So we have good relationships. Of course, the NCAA headquartered in Indianapolis. And those relationships have been so key. We've had to develop some relationships or augment them with the local health officials in a depth that we wouldn't normally have to do that for championships. But that's been fundamental as well, because as we all know, the pandemic has been managed at a very local level, at the county level. And so Marion County, where Indianapolis is located, has been key in our planning, as well as Bexar County and San Antonio. And so we've done it collaboratively and feel good about the things that are in place. And, you know, when the committees decided back in the fall that having the tournaments in 14 different locations on the men's side and even more on the women's side was just not going to be feasible with the different medical protocols and all the locales that we would be operating in, and having some consistency across the board. The question then turned to where will we have that single site for the championships? And since we were already scheduled to be in Indianapolis and San Antonio for the Final Four, it just made sense to explore that as the primary option. And fortunately, we were able to arrange for that. So all 67 games on the men's side and 63 on the women's side will be in those general areas. And we're ready to go in just a few weeks' time.
Great. Well, Jean, obviously keeping the student athletes safe has been a large priority for you and your team. Can you speak to how Ohio State is focused on this and what's happening here in Columbus?
Yeah, we thank you, Linda. And first, let me thank Dan for taking time out of his schedule to join us. Really appreciate his unbelievable leadership. He's done an unreal job in normal circumstances, but obviously with all the things we're dealing with now, he's just been exceptional. So I know he's busy, so thank you for taking the time, Dan. You know, our student athletes have really embraced the protocols that our medical subcommittee from the Big Ten put in place. And Dan and I were chatting before this session. And the one thing that's true for our athletes is the safest place for them is in our cocoon, in the bubble that we've created, that they've been a part of. And our positivity rate is low. Our focus is always to make sure their health and safety is first and foremost. And they've embraced what we've asked them to do. And so I'm really fortunate to have coaches and strength coaches and trainers who have helped our student athletes follow the protocols that we put in place. So things are going well. Actually, with our women's basketball game tonight, our men's basketball game tonight, starting over the next 4 days, we will have 21 events among all of our sports, 21 events home and away. And that's what we fight for, to give our young people a chance to compete. So it's going well for us right now.
So let's talk a little bit now about the modified season. I think, Dan, first to you, the fact that everyone's had to be nimble, you know, there are some, I see some of the chat questions are already talking about this. What will the committee have to consider differently this time around?
Well, you know, one of the last kind of pieces here that we haven't announced or made a final decision on yet is in the unfortunate circumstance of a team not being able to participate in championships, whether, you know, we'd have a replacement team per se. I think we saw that in Columbus with the basketball tournament this summer and how they managed that with kind of teams on standby. And we have a plan that the men's basketball committee has approved. Women's basketball committee will look at tomorrow, and we think we have a good solution there. We hope it won't have to be activated, of course. The teams in the men's and women's basketball championships will have to have 7 consecutive daily tests before they arrive in Indianapolis and San Antonio, and then daily testing upon arrival. So we hope and think that the risk of an entire team being ineligible for the championship is low. But nevertheless, we know from what we've seen in the regular season, disruption is part of this for everyone's health and safety through contact tracing. And if it results in a team not being able to play, we'll have a plan in place for a replacement. Before the tournament starts, really, there's not an opportunity to introduce a replacement team once the tournaments are underway, you know, for competitive equity reasons. But we do hope to start both championships with full fields.
And all these things will be taken into consideration, obviously, during the selection of the committee. Jean, a little bit about Ohio State, both the men and women's teams. You talked about their big schedule coming up in the next few weeks. Can you speak to that importance of making the postseason and why that is important, not only for yourself, of course, but for all of the fans?
For the postseason and having a championship opportunity is critical for all of our sports, all 36 sports we have. And our women's swimming team, for example, is competing next week to defend their Big Ten championship from 2020. Our women's track team is competing in Geneva, Ohio at the indoor facility to defend their championship from last year. And obviously, football had that opportunity to do that when they went to Indianapolis and ultimately defend their championship four in a row in the Big Ten. So postseason is critical for all of our sports, and men's and women's basketball, first and foremost, they have a chance to win the regular season. And for our women's team, that is the most important. But we need to get to a point where we pay tribute to, Dan's heard the speech before, pay tribute to the regular season and conference champions, because that's the gauntlet. At the end of the day, both our men's and women's basketball teams will play more regular season games than they would in a tournament. And that's the conference tournament and the NCAA tournament. So you got to perform in the gauntlet. And so we put a high premium on regular season, but of course, getting to postseason is a priority as well.
This is a question we didn't talk about, but both of you are great leaders and you've had to probably learn some extra fortitude this year. Do you each want to speak to what you've had to learn to do, maybe be more patient or really just with the ever-changing environment? How has that impacted how you lead?
I'll let Gene answer first because I always take his lead. He's been a great mentor for me. So any wisdom he'll share, I'd welcome myself.
Well, it's nothing that anyone on this call would not say. You said one of the words, Linda, is patience, and understand, at least for me, it's going all the way back to March of last year. We were talking about this, Dan, is we have to be nimble and we have to be patient and we have to understand that each day will probably be different and capable of adjusting. And all of you who watched this last fall with football, you know that. You're watching it now, as Dan alluded to, across the country with basketball. You have to adjust and be patient. You cannot overreact. And it's so somewhere along the line, something's going to hit you. So you just got to be ready to adapt and face the change as it comes at you.
I couldn't agree more wholeheartedly. Being flexible and nimble, and I think the thing I'll take out of this as much as anything is just, as Gene mentioned, being patient. I think we all kind of lack some of that in normal times, and it's hit on me that we've had to exercise patience because there was an opportunity all along to make decisions prematurely without as much information throughout this entire pandemic. And so, being patient and getting as much information to make informed decisions in a timely manner has been one of my takeaways. And just trying to be positive with our staff and our constituents. I've hopefully been able to accomplish that a little bit, with all the uncertainty and the daily challenges that we all face personally and professionally. Just trying to be positive and optimistic, and realistic, hopefully has been helpful to our staff and our committees as well.
Now I'm going to turn our questions to really Columbus in particular, and some things that hopefully we have learned along the way as well. But we will be hosting our own mini bubble coming up for Division II women's basketball in the next couple of weeks. So we're excited about that and certainly taking all the right steps to keep everyone safe. But can you talk a little bit, Dan, about what the host city, what you look for in host cities? And we know that certainly we're hosting men's basketball on a regular basis. We had the women's Final Four. So speak a little bit about what makes that destination special, or any destination in particular.
Sure. Well, Columbus has all the ingredients. It's a great example of a championship site that we treasure and will come back to regularly as long as you want to have us. You mentioned the 2018 Women's Final Four, the Division I men's basketball championship coming in 2023. first of all, an organization like yours with your leadership, Linda, is vital to having the local organizing committee that supports championships and can help make things happen and facilitate things. When we go into a city that we don't have all the relationships with, as we would, in Indianapolis, where we're headquartered, for example, a host institution like the Ohio State University and their incredible experience and staff is critically important as well. Their enthusiasm and embracing championship hosting, whether it's NCAA or Big Ten championships, is really fundamental as well. And then facilities, nationwide arena, for the men's championship and women's championship, and the Greater Columbus Convention Center for the Division II Women's Championship. And then there's also the good fortune of having it be a fairly centralized location, right, for our membership. Much of our membership is east of the Mississippi River, and of course, Columbus is just a vibrant downtown area, a capital city that that embraces sports in general, college sports in particular. And so it really has all of the ingredients, which is why we've been so successful with NCAA championships in Columbus, and we'll keep coming back for that same reason.
Thank you so much. And Jean, talk a little bit about, we love when the Buckeyes play in postseason in Columbus, but just, having that added advantage of bolstering an image for a college or university that gets to play in the postseason, and why that is so important for recruiting or getting great coaches.
Yeah, I mean, the exposure for Columbus and Ohio State University and all of our public and private institutions in Central Ohio, for example, are, it's phenomenal. You can't buy what that exposure provides. It gives us a great opportunity to talk about our great city. It's just tremendous pride when any of our teams are competing. So it's really enjoyable. And then when you have someone like a Clark Kellogg on CBS who can actually have local knowledge and talk about our environment, it really helps us. So it's great pride, great point of pride, and it's something that we embrace.
Well, I think we're at the bewitching hour of taking some questions, Riley, and then we'll come back for some closing comments as well. But I noticed there's quite a few questions in the chat that we want to get to. So Riley Newhart from our team is going to jump in.
Yep. Hi, everyone. We do have a lot of good questions, particularly for you, Dan. So strap in, I guess. First question is just about who will actually be in attendance at these games. I think we've seen different things from different sports leagues over the past year as far as protocol goes. Are you expecting to see local stations allowed to come in and cover the tournament? Will we see any fans at the game? And what does the allotment of tickets for family members for these players look like?
Sure. Well, fundamental to our decision to commit to Indianapolis for the men's championship and San Antonio for the women's championship was the ability to have a limited number of family member and player and coach guests in attendance. So that is absolutely approved. There's the travel party for the both championships is 34, inclusive of student athletes, coaches, and administration. And each of those travel party members will have 6 guests welcome. So that's 200 or so for each team, 400 guaranteed. We have not yet made an announcement or decision on general fan attendance. Waiting patiently, as we talked about earlier, to see how things were evolving here in the community with COVID-19. And so we're poised to make an announcement in the next several days about fan attendance, and we're hopeful and optimistic that we may have limited attendance for general fans, but up to and no more than 25%, and that would be a maximum if we get there, based on the size of the 6 different venues we're using in Indianapolis. So in many cases, we won't even come close to 25% by keeping that 6 feet of physical distancing needed in each of the venues. But maybe by the time we get to Lucas Oil Stadium, a much larger venue, we may have slightly closer to 20 or 25% capacity. Media attendance is going to be very limited. All media obligations will be virtual. There'll be no in-person media that will be permitted. So we do have some local writers and television stations that would be credentialed to cover the championship here, and then a number, about 25 national writers that cover college basketball, and then of course the team beat writers will be welcome as well. But that'll be far below what's normally media credential well over 2,000.
I think the next question is on the topic of what changes for the fans watching at home with this different structure. So are we going to see different timing of games to allow for safety protocol to be followed? Usually we're seeing back to back to back. Obviously, when we get into that single site in Indianapolis, that comes into play much more. So are you guys looking at these non-Indianapolis sites, these surrounding areas, as essentially the regionals?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think fans watching on TV won't see significant difference in terms of tip times. We've been able to kind of maintain those. Games will happen in the first rounds essentially from noon through midnight Eastern time. But the venues and the dates will be slightly different. So, first round, normally we have 4 games in a venue on a day of a game. The most number of games in one facility will be 3 at any one time in order to have the time in between games to clean and sanitize. Some venues will only hold 2 games a day. So you'll have to be kind of, observant about where those games are being played. But the tip times themselves should be pretty consistent. The days of the championship are slightly altered. Normally we start first rounds on Thursday. We'll start those on Friday this year for medical reasons. And the regionals are a little bit different. I'm kind of excited about the regionals on the men's side. Normally we have Sweet 16 games on Thursday and Friday night and Elite 8 games on Saturday and Sunday. But this year we'll have the Sweet 16 games on Saturday and Sunday, and there'll be an exclusive TV window. So there'll be a doubleheader in the afternoon, doubleheader in the evening, both days. And so those games will be run on television unopposed. So, and then they'll lead into 2 doubleheaders in prime time on Monday and Tuesday night for the Elite 8 games. So I think for viewers, it sets up to be a pretty compelling 3 weeks of college basketball.
I think it definitely will be as well, especially since we're also hungry for it after not getting it last year. I imagine it's going to be a really exciting time on top of what's always a really, really exciting time. So another question about safety, is there a backup for these surrounding sites? If for whatever reason you see a virus spike in Bloomington, is there any sort of talk about how you guys will handle that, if there will be shifts made?
We do have a backup. One of our host institutions is Ball State University, and that would serve as a backup facility where we're to need it if one of the 6 venues is unavailable. And Ball State's also doing some other things to help us to host the tournament. And Indiana State is another one that's helping us as a host as well. So we do have some options and have some contingencies in place should we need them.
Yeah, a true collaborative effort, it sounds like. A couple more questions on the topic of selections and the committee this year. So you talked a little bit about the announcement of potential replacement teams. Do you have a time of when you think that will be announced?
I would say within the next week.
Great. And, does the committee expect to have a contingency plan if you see conference or teams that want to skip the conference tournament, reducing that risk of exposure? Is there chatter about that?
Yeah, there was significant consideration given by both men's and women's committees around that topic of opting out of conference championships. And those decisions normally are decisions made at the conference level and the institutional level. The conferences have ultimate authority in how they determine their automatic qualifier. And we did a deep dive with conferences and ADs around this topic of, what the real risk is around teams maybe opting out and what maybe the perceived risk is. And the committee ultimately decided that authority should still remain at the local and conference level. That we're living in a complex time, around game disruptions and conference tournament. We've given the greatest flexibility to conferences to alter the way they determine their AQ through their conference tournament schedule, through the format of their conference tournaments. The deadline is next Friday, which is a year later than it would normally be. So the committee decided that going beyond and changing policy was a bit of an overreach, and that this should be managed at the conference level.
Sure. And, on the topic of conference, Jean, we got a question for you. Buckeyes are looking great this year. How do you feel about deciding a Big Ten regular season title in a year with these unbalanced schedules where some teams have played more games than others?
That's a great question. And, I'm okay with it. I mean, it goes back to our earlier question about, the uncertainty that we're all dealing with. The reality is, the unbalanced schedule is a challenge. We understand that. But we'll be able to, once we get towards the end of the season, to look back and see what we've dealt with. When you think about teams that hadn't had the opportunity to play for a long period of time, that doesn't mean that's not a good basketball team. So you have to, at the end of the day, just be able to adjust. And even if we had designed balanced schedules, it would have ended up being unbalanced because of the postponements and cancellations. So I'm fine with it. I'm just glad all of our kids and all of our schools have a chance to play. And as we get towards the end of the season, we'll, as ADs, we may have to make different decisions around tiebreakers and things of that nature. We'll just have to adjust.
So Jean and Dan, is there anything else that perhaps you'd like to add before we close?
I'd just like to reiterate two things. One, Linda, thank you for your continued leadership with the Sports Commission, and thank everyone for being on this session. But I can't emphasize enough Dan's role and leadership in all of intercollegiate athletics. He has really been stellar, and so we appreciate him taking time out of his busy schedule to spend time with us in Columbus, and appreciate his leadership as he moves forward. So thank you, Dan.
Well, thanks, Gene. The feeling's mutual. Gene has been an unbelievable leader in college basketball and just in general at the national level, serving on the men's basketball committee as the chair, the men's basketball oversight committee. I even recruited him back one year for an extra year on the oversight committee when we really needed him. And there's no one better in our business than Gene Smith. So appreciate you. And Linda, thanks for the opportunity to be with the Sports Council, and appreciate your continued support of NCAA championships. We deeply appreciate it.
Of course, and we look forward to having our teams in Columbus in just the next couple of weeks. And again, thanks to everyone joining us today. Please stay warm. We're going to do this again in a couple of weeks, and we really appreciate everyone joining us. So take care, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Be well.